morning, everyone. Good morning. Yeah, as Johnny said, I'm Betty. I'm part of the team here. I've been here for nearly 4 years, which feels like it's gone so fast, but at the same time, I feel like I've got gray hair, and I'm only 26. So if anyone has any solutions for that, just chat to me after the service. Would love to know. But today, I'm going to be starting our new series we're going to look at together called Love One Another. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about this topic of love, and how can we grow in loving God, but as well as loving others around us. And so I'm really excited to be starting us off this week, and we're going to see all that God does over the next 3 weeks as we journey through this together. But one of the greatest acts of love I have ever received was when I was 11 years old. I was born in Zimbabwe and I lived there till I was 11. But in that time, my dad moved to England when I was 3 years old, and it wouldn't be another 8 years till my family was reunited, so I didn't see my dad for 8 years. And in that time, my family prayed and prayed and prayed. My dad had moved to England because of the political situation in Zimbabwe. Some of you know the history of that. It's very complicated, and it still is. And my dad started going to this church. He was living in this area in England called Milton Keynes, and he started going to church. And he met this family, the Baldrys, and this family would invite him round for dinner, for lunches after church, and they really took him as part of their family. Not only that, but a little while into him going to their house after church, they were moving to Devon, where my parents live now. And they invited my dad to come along with them. Not only that, but they had this company, this marketing company, so they invited my dad, "Why don't you work for our company?" And not only that, but they said, "You won't have a place to live when we move to Devon. Why don't you move into our house?" And not only that, but they decided, "We have such a heart for you and your family and your story. We would love to pay everything for your family to move to England." And so not only that, but when everything was set for us to move, they rallied around the church in Devon, Autry and Mary, and they said if anyone has anything in their house and wants to furnish Frank and Rose, my mom and dad's house, which again, not only that, they'd got this house for my family, and they showed us this outrageous generosity and love. And we have a picture of the Baldrys, which Lucas is going to put on the screen, but I've known them now, and they're like second parents to me. And this is us last year at their daughter Hannah's wedding, who is like a sister to me. But I shared that story because as I've grown up, I recognize what the Baldrys did and continue to do for our family was an extraordinary act of love. It's easy to love and show love to people we know, but they did not know my dad. They didn't know my family, but they opened up their home. We lived with them for a bit when we first moved until the house was ready, and they welcomed us with open arms in such an extravagant way. In fact, I'm so filled with gratitude for what they've done because it's changed the course of my whole life. And to love in such a way can only be because of an infilling of the love of God in us. There's no other way to explain why people, without knowing somebody, would pour all their resources, all their time, would invite people into their home, if not for the love of God. And this is what I want to talk to us about today. I want to talk to us about loving radically. Love radically. So if you have your Bible, we're going to spend some time looking at a passage that's going to come up on the screen. It's the story of the Good Samaritan, and many of you might know this passage already, but I just want us to get over maybe our preconceived ideas, or maybe you've read it before, and I want us to look at it with fresh eyes again this morning. So we're going to be in Luke 10:25. It says, on one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn to take care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert of the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." In this passage, Jesus is confronted, we see, by an expert of the law. And what that would have meant in the context of the day is that this man was a lawyer specializing in Jewish law. So he knew the Torah, he knew the scriptures well. And the question he has here for Jesus is, how can I have this eternal life that Jesus has been preaching about? And Jesus kind of turns the question back on him. And he asks him, well, what does it say? You are an expert. You know the scriptures. You know the word. What does it say? And he has a quick answer. He says, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Straightforward, or is it? Jesus always exposes our self-righteousness, the way we sometimes put ourselves, and maybe we know best and we know better, and we've got a quick response, we have a quick answer. And I can think of so many times in my life I've been like this man, where Jesus has confronted me with something and he's asked me, and I know the answer. But often he will turn our understanding. He's not afraid of offending our understanding in order that he would show us the height, the depth, the width, the length of his love for us. And he does this in this passage with this man. And so I want to dive into that and look at what the Bible teaches us through this example. As I was preparing this, I really felt it was God wanted to encourage the church. He wanted to encourage us, but he also wanted to challenge us in the places maybe we think we know best. Maybe we think we're experts. Maybe we think we have the answer. And I saw him gently highlighting places in my own life, but I think he wants to do that for all of us. And the verse that came to mind is Isaiah 55. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways." And so as I share on this topic, I would love us to personally be thinking, where are the areas in my life, Lord, where I feel like I know the answers? Where are the areas in my life where you're teaching me, showing me, and calling me to love more radically? And so as we do that, I want to look at 4 things this morning to help us better understand this topic and this subject. So the first one is, love requires action. Love requires action. In the early 90s, a Baptist pastor called Gary Chapman published a book called The 5 Love Languages, and maybe some of you might be familiar and have used these to help you better understand this topic of love, but he detailed how people receive and give love in 5 different ways. And that's words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, or physical touch. But what I love that it seems that Gary grasped from this book is how love is not just a feeling. We don't just feel. If someone says they love me, it needs an action. I think often in our society we have reduced love to just how I feel. Oh, I feel like this, or I feel butterflies. And probably that's largely due to the films and the movies that portray this idyllic scene of what love is. But what he seems to grasp in this book is that love requires an action. And in verse 33, in this passage in Luke, it says, "But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. When he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine." The Samaritan could have just stopped at feeling sorry for this man. He could have just stopped at feeling compassion for him. He could have just stopped, at least he stopped because the rest of the people in this passage just walked past. But the Bible says he acted. He stops everything he's doing and he goes to the man. The love that the Bible shows us is not a passive kind of love. And I live in a community house called Casa Cruzeiro, which some of you may know. But the vision of a house in this community is that we would show people the love of Jesus. And we do this in different ways, whether that's opening the house for kids and families, whether that's Bible studies or times of prayer, having people around for food. And a couple weeks ago, it had been a particularly long day. It was a Thursday, and Thursdays tend to be very busy. So I'd come to church and had done a day here. And then Thursdays, I also was cooking at the house, and I was feeling really tired. So, and cooking at the house it's an extreme sport because we live with a lot of people, and so it requires a lot of pans, a lot of help. And so by the end of the night, I was deflated, and everyone was one by one was going to bed. And as I was getting ready to go to bed, this couple with their 7-month-old baby walked in, and I was like, Jesus, help me, because I knew they wanted to chat and wanted to spend time, but everything in me did not want to be there at that hour. But in that moment, I felt God really challenge me. And he said this one thing to me, "But is that not why you're here, Betty?" And I was like, it is, but everything in my flesh did not want to stay, did not want to chat. I love babies, but I did not want to be holding their baby at that time. But I felt like I needed to stay, and I felt God's love for this couple. And so I ended up having one of the most wonderful conversations with them, and God really used that time to draw us closer. But often we don't always feel like it. There are times where I don't feel like extending love. There are times where I don't feel maybe this love overflowing out of my heart. We might feel tired, we might feel weary, it might have been a long day, whatever it is. But the love that the Bible calls us to is sacrificial. And I dare to say that love is not love at all if there is no sacrifice involved. In one of the most quoted verses in the Bible, John 3, verse 16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." And God could have just stopped at loving the world. That would have been enough. He could have just stopped at the feeling of, I love these people, and that could have been enough. But his love has an action, because he so loved the world that he would send his only Son for me, for you today. He gave that which was most valuable to him for me, for you, showing us the way that we can also love, showing us how much he loves us, but also commissioning us, go love in the same way I have loved you. And so love requires action. The second thing I want to look at is love looks past judgment. Love has no prejudice. We live in a culture today that is very polarized. There is left, right, Catholic, Protestant, rich, poor, flamenco, Vasco. And in many ways, this is not new. There's nothing new under the sun, the Bible talks about. And this is not something new. In this passage we just looked at, this polarization in culture is not unfamiliar. The people who walked past, it was the priest walked past this man, and then it says the Levite, and the Levite would have been people who work in church and in the temple. And so today it'll be like Johnny walking past and I walk past this man in today's terminology. Basically the people that you most expect to help walk past. But who stops? Who pays attention to this man? It's only the Samaritan. And this for us doesn't maybe carry the same essence of shock, but to the Jewish audience, hearing Jesus share this at the time would have been so shocking and so kind of revolutionary and very hard for them to hear these words. Because the Samaritans were sworn enemies of the Jewish people, and they were seen as social outcasts. And they were seen by the Jewish people as these idol worshippers who have kind of mixed the laws of the Torah and don't believe in the true God. And it's interesting that Jesus would choose the hated Samaritan to be the hero of the story. In fact, for all of time, I grew up in church. My parents would take us to church, and then we had Sunday school, kids' church, and this story, I'm sure in all the kids' churches around the world, you learn about the Good Samaritan. And those are two words that the Jewish people would have never put together, Samaritan and good. But why? Why does Jesus do this? Jesus doesn't define a neighbor by nationality. He doesn't define by race. He doesn't define by religion or social class. But really a neighbor is anyone who needs help. Anyone who is in front of us at any moment becomes our neighbor. Who Jesus calls us to love as ourselves is anyone who God has put around us. So maybe your neighbors physically, the locations that God has put you, the people who are right in front of you as you walk down the streets, everyone around you becomes your neighbor. You see, many of us, I myself, at the top of the list, find it very easy to love my family, even when it's hard, because I'm like, God put me in this family. And so I love them. I find it easy to love the people with similar sense of humor, who know how to make me laugh, who know all the words, the right things to say. I find it easy to love my friends. But I definitely find it harder to love people maybe who are different to me. And it gets even worse when people have hurt me. I don't know how to, it's hard. I don't know how to love them. And people that I might look at and think, gosh, how could Jesus, but they've done all these things, how could Jesus forgive this? It gets a little harder to love. And in 2015, Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, killed 9 black people at a Bible study in South Carolina. And the church members had welcomed him to their weekly Bible study when he opened fire and causing these 9 members of the church to die. But what gripped many around the world about this tragic story is the reaction of the church members. During the trial, after losing her daughter, Ethel Lance said these words: "You took something so precious away from me, and I will never talk to her again. I will never be able to hold her again, but I forgive you." And Felicia Sanders, after losing her son, said these words: "We welcomed you Wednesday night in our Bible study with open arms. You have killed some of the most beautiful people that I know, But as we say in the Bible study, we enjoyed you. May God have mercy on you. Only the love of God poured out by the Spirit can generate such words after such an awful thing. Only the love of God would lead us to forgiveness and not hatred. Only the love of God can begin to utter from within us these words to come out at a trial as you face the reality of never seeing your daughter again, never seeing her son again. And I love this from a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Love is the only force capable of transforming even an enemy into a friend. And in fact, Jesus raises the standard of who is our neighbor, because the radical love that he calls us to is actually a love for our enemies. It's not just love your neighbors. And he says, love your neighbor, hate your enemy, is what the scriptures said in the Old Testament. But he said, I tell you, love your enemies and actually pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of God. Wow, that is the standard. Love your enemies, and this so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Love has no judgment. Love looks past our judgments. And the third thing I want us to look at is love costs us something. In verse 34, it says about the Good Samaritan that he went to him, to the man who was lying by the side of the road. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he takes out money, 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. The Samaritan uses his own resources. He uses his own oil, wine, bandages, transportation, money. He doesn't withhold. It costs something to help this man. It costs us something to love. It may be our time. It may be our resources, our schedules, our comfortability, our pride. It costs us something to show love to the people around us. A couple years ago, we had a guy move into our community at Casa Cruzeiro. And before he moved, I remember having a chat with the leadership. We sat down, and I remember Luke asked me, what do you think about him moving in? And if I'm being honest, I remember having this tug of war in my mind, because on one part, I knew Casa Cruzeiro is a place for people like him, who've messed up, got caught in the wrong things, like a life of crime, which many are often exposed to living in the comunidades. But also, in my head, I had this fear of who I known this man to be. And again, I remember like this tug of war in my mind. I remember God challenging me of this tendency I have to dictate who does and ultimately does not deserve the grace of God. But as we've welcomed him into our community, I have seen God transform him with my own eyes. And this is a man that I had fear, and I've seen God do such a work in him. And today, he's like a brother to me. He's like a brother to all of us. We laugh, we chat. He brings so much joy into our community. And we have a picture here. And God has not only challenged me, but he's not only grown him, but he's challenged me on my preconceptions that I have. Because love costs us something. It costs us maybe our comfortability of what we've known. It costs us having to rethink some of the thoughts that we have. It costs us having to rethink the prejudices in our minds of, I thought you were this. But as we see God pours his love into us to love, we begin to see transformation. And I remember a particular moment of his story was we went away as a house, and one of the nights we were sharing encouragements and things that we loved about one another. and people just began to share these different words. And we've never seen him cry. He's quite a strong character, and he just began to weep and cry and couldn't handle it. He had to go outside because it's the first time maybe he was hearing people say all these words about him. If it had not been for Luke being like, I really sense, God, we need to open our doors, who knows where he would be. But love costs us something. And the last thing I want to look at is love leaves a mark. Love leaves a mark. Love not only leaves a mark on us as we give it, but it always leaves a mark on others as they receive it. In this story, the love the Good Samaritan gave brought about healing for this man. It brought about transformation in his life. And imagine the testimony he went from this place sharing. The man I least expected to help me was a man who bent down, put me on a donkey, took me, and looked after me. What a radical story of outrageous love and compassion, and how that would have absolutely changed his life. And I've been forever transformed and marked by the story I shared at the beginning of this family, the Baldrys. It's changed my life. It's transformed the way I see the money God gives me. It's transformed the way that I view friendships. It's changed the way that I view community, everything. And who knows where I would be? Who knows where my family would be? I probably wouldn't be here in front of you this morning if it had not been for the radical love that they showed me. Love leaves a mark. And it continues to, because now all of us get to benefit from the radical love that I was shown to all those years ago. We get to participate in the story. We are the fruit of all they've prayed for me, and all they've sown in to me. And our actions may seem small. Maybe you think, would going for coffee with that person really make a difference? Will spending time with that person really make a difference? Will stopping by that person on the street really make a difference? But I want to encourage you this morning that yes, it always does. And you have no idea what seeds God is planting into people's hearts. You have no idea the story that even from a conversation that God begins to put into motion, because love always leaves a mark. Ultimately, we love because Jesus first loved us. The Bible tells us that while we were still sinners, whilst we were enemies of God, that's when he decided to send his only son to die for us. How can you love your neighbor? How can you love your enemies? We love out of the overflow of the love of God that he pours into us. And ultimately, we can love in such a way because Jesus, God himself, has shown us the lengths that love goes, even unto death. And as I come to land and finish, I want to end by this quote from a book I'm reading at the moment by Brennan Manning called The Furious Longing of God. And he says, Jesus said the world is going to recognize you as his by only one sign: the way you love one another. You're going to leave people feeling a little better or a little worse. You're going to affirm them or deprive them, but there will be no neutral exchange. If we, as a Christian community, took seriously that the sign of our love for Jesus is our love for one another, I am convinced it will change the world. Would you like to stand, and we're going to pray?